Most of my oil pastel portraits are of people which are either 3/4 or side profile, and this is a 3/4 portrait. What I don't normally have is so many accessories with the portrait. Sometimes there'll be a hat, but not always. Sometimes there's glasses, but sometimes if there is glasses, there's normally not a hat as well. And with this character, there's a hat, there's glasses, and there's a mobile phone. This may not sound important or significant, but for me, when it comes to trying to capture someone reasonably well in oil pastels, having so many accessories to consider was just an interesting thing to consider and contend with, because I'm trying to get these done in a day when I have other jobs to do. So it was an interesting challenge to push myself and see what additional things can be included and can be observed whilst managing my time well. I mention this in almost all of these, but in case this is the first video you've seen of me using oil pastels, my approach has developed into using a dark mid-tone to start off with. The darker colours I find quite useful to get down first, because then when you add a lighter mid-tone on top, it starts to blend with that darker colour. This means that you're building a texture on the surface instead of fighting from light to dark. You're applying the dark, and then the light on top blends with that darker first tone, and it creates this texture where it softens the first marks you've made. Then on top of that, I start to add lighter and lighter tones. So you can see here I'm adding a light pink. It's not as light as a white would be, but it's much lighter than the yellow or the red that I started off with. The red you could even describe as an orange, I suppose, because it's quite a light and warm red. But then once I add the light pink on top, that pink is describing the light, it's blending with the other colours, and it's also describing the form. But aside from that, it's also creating another layer of texture, because parts of the skin will be catching the light, but it's also pushing into these other colours and creating these softer marks which describe skin better than the first few layers which I put down with that orangey red would have, because those were more graphic. When they first go down, you're drawing patches of tone onto the surface, and then as soon as you start to go over the top of it with a lighter colour, you're then creating this blended mixture of the two. Now, it doesn't hurt to go from lighter to darker again, but do it strategically if you can. The way that I do it is to make sure that I have these textures and tones described to a significant extent, and then on top of that I'm really describing something specific, like subtle shadow areas beneath the nose, under the chin, the darkness of the glasses and the phone, and in the eyes. It's only little marks, and because you've got down these mid-tones already, they are going to soften these darker marks that you put on the surface. If you were to draw these dark marks down first, they would be much darker, and then they would be softened by going on the top with lighter colours. So that's why I'm fairly strategic with how I apply this. If I'm going to draw on the skin as I am at the moment, I've not used that darkest colour. I've gone to a brown that's lighter in tone to what the black was for the glasses and the phone. This is because I don't want it to be the darkest shadow. I want it to sit on the surface and just describe some areas of the face that aren't catching the light as much. So it's not going to be the shadow areas under the eye or beneath the nose or in the neck. Instead, it's going to be the cheekbones, or it's going to be describing wrinkles or, nuances of the fingers. The hat was a tricky one because it's a camouflage hat, so trying to get the right green and then how to describe the camouflage became a bit of a push and pull. But that doesn't hurt. That's something where you can play a little bit, because oil pastels give you this opportunity to layer things up. So I'm using white and yellow, and then I use a brown on top, and I'm trying to squiggle it on because I don't want it to be too bold. I want it to show subtlety of camouflage, which can be a strange pattern when you're trying to draw it. And the character, I think, comes together fairly quickly. I know this is a time-lapse video, but you can see how quickly it develops into a person. I don't put a lot of detail into the shirts, but I think that's because there is so much detail in the face, and I don't put too much into the hand, just enough to describe what the fingers are doing and where the shadow collects. Now the shirt I'm keeping light, and the shadow on the shirt is a light greeny blue. And this is enough, I think, to suggest creases in the shirt and not to distract from the strength of the character that you can see on the face, with these bright blue eyes and this focus on the phone call, and just little touches in the sunglasses to suggest bits of reflection. And there he is. I'm just brushing off the bits of collected crumbs that you can see on the surface there. But there he is. There is the character. I always do a last few touches after I've brushed off all of the dust, because you make the last few observations and realise there are a couple of touches that will really bring this out. It's going back to that first red, that orangey red, just to go on top and strengthen some of the suggestions of the subtle shadow tones on the face.